If you enjoy this video, please consider giving a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you have any ideas for future videos, share them in the comments section below. This original bedtime story is made possible thanks to Slumberland patrons. If you would like to support this channel, you can find Patreon details in the description and on my channel homepage. So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to comfortably drift asleep, I'm just going to tell this sleep story in the background. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And as you comfortably drift asleep, you can have a sense of a woman called Meg. And Meg lives in the coziest log cabin on a farm. And every evening she settles down, reading a good book, aware of the flickering, dancing light from a log fire. And she absorbs herself in that book before heading to bed. And every day she heads out onto the farm with her sheepdog, Milton. And together they round up the sheep. They rotate them from one field to the next across the year. Meg enjoys the change of the seasons. She enjoys the way the sun rises on crisp winter mornings with that low lying mist, the glistening dew on the grass, the warmth of the sun in the summer, the changes of the flowers and plant life as the seasons change from browns and very little colour to an explosion of greens and colourful plants through spring and an increase in life, with butterflies and bees and birds flying overhead, and the birth of lambs and seeing all those little lambs in the field. And then as summer approaches, a peak of dense plants and leaves and greenery, where the woodland is at its most dense. And then approaching autumn, where that woodland changes colours. Where it goes from shades of green to shades of browns and bronze and yellows. And then back to the winter. And every day of every year, Meg enjoys the comfortable repetition of this lifestyle working on the farm through the day, settling down with a good book in the evening in the log cabin, watching the changing seasons as each year progresses. And then one day, while Meg is out in the fields with Milton, moving the sheep from one field to the next, enjoying the peace and the comfort of the experience of just encouraging Milton to herd those sheep, and watching as Milton does such an incredible job of that. Meg notices somebody sat on the fence of one of the fields. And so after the sheep are herded into the relevant field, she heads over to that person, and it's a person wearing a fitted, full-length purple jacket. And as they jump down off of the fence, the jacket flows around them before closing around them as they land. And this person in purple approaches them. And Meg asks who they are. And they explain that they're a wizard. That they're the wizard of this environment. And that they need her help. That they're always watching how the different farmers and the different people in all the villages interact with the environment. That they come from the nearby forest. And now they need Meg's help. And Meg expresses that she doesn't know how she could be able to help. All she's ever known is this farming life. And the wizard explained that there's a desert coming. That if they're not careful, all this land that's lush and green in the summer and the spring will turn to just being desert. That it'll all turn to dust. And that they need Meg's help to put a stop to this. That a portal between a desert world and this world had been opened up accidentally by someone who was experimenting with something they didn't really know. But the only way to seal the portal and save this world from becoming a desert planet is to head through that portal into the desert world, to find the temple in the desert, and to activate the switch that will seal the portal. And once the switch is activated, it sets in motion a process that leads to the closure of the portal, and that there'll be time to activate that switch and make it back across the desert to the portal and leave through the portal before it closes. And they'll be able to know whether they were successful, because the portal will end up closing behind them. And Meg asks why the wizard can't just do this themselves, and why they're being chosen. And the wizard explains that the portal has opened up in the nearby woodland and is beginning to influence the nearby woodland, and that woodland is the epicenter of where the desert will begin spreading from on this world, and that the trigger that opens the portal makes a tremendous amount of noise that's such a great amount of noise that the wizard themselves can't access that desert world and get anywhere near to the trigger. But because Meg can't hear and so experiences the world differently, she can head to that temple and trigger the switch, triggering the closure of the portal without being affected by the incredibly loud noise. And the wizard explains that they can guide Meg to the portal, and they can wait at the edge of the portal, but they can't pass through that portal because the noise is so loud, and it gets louder and louder the closer to the switch. And it's so loud that it's painful just to pass through the portal. And Meg agrees to help this wizard. And so the wizard walks with Meg down towards the woodland. And they walk into the woodland, Meg noticing the changes to the air temperature, almost like a change to the pressure on her skin. And the dancing light as some of the sun's rays break through the canopy of the woodland. And the feeling of each footstep on the path as she walks along following that wizard. And after some time walking deeper and deeper into the woodland, they come to a clearing where the desert has begun changing the ground. And in the center of this desert-like clearing is almost like an orb in space, just sitting there above the ground. And through that orb, Meg could see that other world. And she walked around the orb. And she could see that other world in different directions. As if she was walking around in that other world. Yet she was just looking through that sphere, that orb. And as she walked around, from one direction she could see, way off on the horizon, a slight spike on the horizon, which is otherwise relatively flat, and is aware that that's the top of the pyramid that she's got to head towards. And she walks up to the orb. And the wizard walks with her. And the wizard puts the hand on her shoulder, looks her square in the eye, and says, "Good luck." Meg smiles. Milton sits down next to the wizard. And Meg, tentatively, and with a little apprehension, steps into that orb. And as soon as she steps through that orb, so she can feel the increased temperature of this desert world. She walks a few steps, turns and looks back, and can see an orb floating in space, and through that orb she can see the wizard and Milton. She can see the trees of the woodland. She turns back towards the pyramid, and she's surprised how still the air seems here. And she walks through the sand in the direction of the pyramid. Finding her feet sinking into that sand slightly with each step that she takes, almost like walking on an incredibly dry, sandy beach. And she continues walking towards that pyramid. And as she walks towards that pyramid, so she looks around her. And she sees that the sun in the sky here appears so much larger than the sun on her own planet. And as she walks towards that pyramid, getting closer and closer as that pyramid gets larger and larger on the horizon, so that sun slowly begins to set. And as the sun sets, so she notices, just as she would expect on Earth, the temperature begins to drop. And she wants to reach that pyramid before nightfall, because she knows she won't be able to see it as soon as the sun has fully set. So she picks up her pace, continues to walk towards that pyramid, and can just see the dark shape of the pyramid against the reddening night sky. And a short time after the sun has fully dropped over the horizon, she manages to arrive at that pyramid. And she knows that she doesn't want to turn off the portal until she can see her way back across the desert. She's aware that the air still seems incredibly still. She walks into the entrance to the pyramid and decides to just rest in the entrance of the pyramid until the sun begins to rise again. And she felt that the speed the sun set would mean that it would rise in perhaps 6 to 8 hours. And so she decided that she would settle down and relax for a little while. And she could see, as the sky got darker and darker, stars in the sky here, not recognizing any of the constellations, noticing some patches in the sky as her eyes adapted to the dark, noticing some reds and greens, almost like there were some clouds in the sky, in space. She saw that there seemed to be far more shooting stars here than she'd ever seen on Earth when gazing up at the night sky. And she found this environment to be so peaceful, with the air being so still, the desert being so still. This temple, this pyramid being so still. And just the gentle movement of the stars across the sky, almost imperceptible. And those shooting stars. She imagined that this planet must orbit a star in a more dense cloud of gas and dust than the Earth, that perhaps leads to a higher rate of shooting stars. And she thought about how still and calm and peaceful everything is here, and was curious about whether there really was this incredibly loud noise coming from within this temple, as she was unaware of any noise at all. And while she relaxed there, she found herself beginning to drift gently and comfortably asleep. And as she drifted asleep, she began to dream. She dreamt about walking with Milton high up in some mountains, enjoying walking around those mountains and finding a river up in those mountains and getting into a canoe with Milton and carefully pushing through the water in that canoe and feeling each push, each stroke through that water. feeling the coolness of the mountain air on her cheeks, and seeing how happy Milton looks sat opposite her, and placing the oar in the canoe, and putting her hand into the water, feeling the coolness of that water, noticing that coolness the way it can spread from the fingertips to the palm of the hand and gently up the arm. It made her aware of the power of the environment, where such a small act as touching the water could lead to a physical change, like the hand going numb. And she thought to herself about that numbness as she lifted her hand out of the water, and whether it would be possible to transfer that numbness elsewhere. And as the canoe just gently and slowly drifted on the water, she touched her nose with her hand, and she could already feel the coolness of the air on her nose and passing in and out of her nostrils with each breath. But she was curious whether it was possible to touch your nose and pass that numbness into the nostrils and into the nose and deep down into the sinuses. And as she touched her nose, so she could feel her nose becoming numb, that numbness spreading inside the nose and through the sinus system. Then after a few moments, she began the process of habituating to this change. She was still aware of being able to breathe in and out so comfortably. She was still aware of the feeling of that breathed in and out air as it passed into the lungs and out of the lungs. And she was aware that the more numb her nose and sinuses became, the easier it became for her to breathe so comfortably. As her nose seemed to almost stop, almost inflaming itself to the cold, and just relaxed and breathed normally and comfortably. And she started developing these insights. She was already aware that the fact that she can't hear means that it doesn't matter how much noise is around her. Her ears aren't affected or irritated by that noise. And she was now realizing that as she made her nose numb, the frigid air no longer affected or irritated her nostrils, and she could breathe calmly and deeply, with each breath being a pleasure. She imagined that with a numb nose, if any of Milton's fur got into her nose, it wouldn't tickle. You'll just continue to be able to breathe fine. And as she continued with Milton to let that canoe drift across this river, so she gained some deeper relaxation and insights. She could feel the warmth of the sun and the coolness of the air somehow mixing and mingling to trigger healing deep within her here, as if just drifting and floating in nature in this peaceful way had deep healing properties, and that dreaming this allows you to heal yourself and create that healing change deeply. And after, without any thought, she did some deep inner healing. She started to feel that the sun was rising, that there was a warmth on her cheeks that wasn't from the inner experience, and that there was a light on her eyes that wasn't from the inner experience. And she drifted back to noticing that the sun was rising on this desert planet. And as the sun rose, she could see that her footsteps were still in the sand. The air was incredibly still. She headed into the pyramid, and she could feel pulsing like a deep vibrating passing up from the ground through her feet. She could feel that pulsing was increasing, and so she followed that increasing pulsing as she navigated around this temple, navigated around the inside of this pyramid, until eventually she saw something which almost seemed to be sending lightning bolts up through the roof of the pyramid, and a switch. And she walked over to that switch. She felt a little tension as she reached for the switch, unsure exactly what was going to happen next. She pressed that switch and could feel a change through her feet to that deep pulsing. And she could see that things around the walls were beginning to change, that pillars were starting to turn. She didn't know who turned this on or how and what happened to them. But she could see that something was now happening, and she assumed this was the machine turning itself off. So she navigated her way quickly back through this pyramid, back out into the desert, and quickly headed across that desert, following her footsteps back the direction she came, until after some time of rushing back across the desert, she could see that orb, and she noticed that the orb appeared larger than it had been when she came through. And so she assumed that perhaps the orb had been getting larger and larger ever since the portal opened. And maybe that was how it was going to spread through Earth. And she hoped that now her change would make it so this portal would shrink back down again, and she dashed through the portal, back out into the woodland, into that clearing. And the wizard stood up from sitting down and walked over to Meg. And Meg said that she's done it. She's turned off the switch. And the wizard said that it'll take a little while for the portal to shrink back down and close. But they can just sit down while that happens to make sure that it looks like it's closing. And so they sit down together. Milton comes up, rests his head on Meg's lap. Meg gently strokes Milton while they sit, watching that portal and noticing that that portal does slowly seem to be shrinking. And after some hours, as the sun here is beginning to set, the portal has shrunk to just a point of light before that point of light vanishes, almost in a blink of an eye. And the wizard creates a light above his hand and guides Meg and Milton back through the woods and back out to the farm, and walks Meg all the way back to her cabin. And Meg invites the wizard in for a cup of tea and is intrigued by this wizard and wants to learn more about them, learn what they do, how they do it, what abilities they have, how old they are, and is incredibly interested to have this opportunity to meet someone new. She rarely encounters anyone new, living every day pretty much the same as every previous day. Just occasionally being in the presence of others, but rarely talking to others. And now there's this one individual who's so intriguing and different and curious. And over a cup of tea, they engage in conversation. And the wizard shares about how there are some things they can control and do, and other things they can't. They can't fix things that are broken using magic, but they can influence other things. They can hear the plants and animals communicating. They can touch a tree and have a sense of what that tree is communicating. They can touch the ground, and the grass will communicate through their touch. A bird could land on their hand, and they can understand that bird. They can influence an increase in rainfall. They can encourage it to be drier. But they're not able to do some things that people might assume that they could. that they live for thousands of years and see change over those thousands of years, and that they can encourage a path for how things develop, that they can't fix what is already broken, and that their main role is as a protector of nature. And there are many wizards, and they can take on many forms. They can take on the form of anything in nature. They can take on the form of the wind, of the rain, of grass, of trees. They can take on the form of different animals. And here they've just taken on the form of a human. And after engaging in conversation for a while, the wizard leaves, and Meg feels that she's made a new friend. As they agree to see each other again, because Meg feels the conversation was so interesting, the knowledge the wizard has. And that night, with Milton sleeping at the end of the bed, Meg, comfortably and relaxed, drifts and floats, so peacefully, so calmly asleep.